The name is Alexa Stone, and on paper, I'm the 30-year-old CEO of Apex Air Fleet, a multi-billion-dollar private aviation firm. But to my parents, Richard and Martha Stone, I was for a full decade just the living, breathing evidence of their greatest disappointment. I know that sounds dramatic, but I promise you, the drama in my family wasn't about shouting matches. It was about the cold, quiet weight of unfulfilled legacy. Our four-bedroom colonial in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, maybe an hour's drive from the city, was immaculate, but it was never comfortable. It felt less like a home and more like the pristine, climate-controlled office extension of Stone Consulting Group, SCD, the management firm my parents ran. Success in our world wasn't measured by happiness. It was measured by the size of your portfolio and the prestige of your career title. My destiny was set before I could even read. Alexis, pay attention to how your father handles this negotiation, my mother, Martha, would instruct, pulling my 6-year-old self into the polished mahogany home office. You'll need these skills when you take over the company. While my peers were trading Pokemon cards or practicing plies, I was being drilled on corporate jargon and boardroom etiquette. My bookshelf was packed with titles like The Art of the Deal and Good to Great, not The Secret Garden. Every single achievement, every award, was simply a stepping stone on a path they had meticulously mapped out. There was no space for Alexis the person, only Alexis the future consultant. I still remember the sting of an A- in 4th grade math. Most parents would celebrate the effort. Mine hired a private tutor within the hour. Stone women do not get A-minuses, my father, Richard, stated with that cold finality that always made my stomach clench. We cannot build a consulting empire on mediocrity. The pressure was relentless. Dinner conversations weren't about our day. They were strategy sessions. They'd quiz me on leveraged buyouts and market penetration before I'd even grasp fractions. My childish interests were a nuisance, an interruption to the main event, which was their grand vision for their heir. It was exhausting, but for years I didn't know anything else. This relentless drive was just the air I breathed. The first crack in my perfect little gilded cage appeared when I was 8. We were driving past a small regional airport, Aurora Municipal, I think it was, and I saw it, a sleek silver private jet lifting off the tarmac, climbing with impossible grace against the bright blue sky. It looked like pure freedom. "Look at that plane!" I exclaimed, pressing my face against the glass. Imagine flying one of those. My mother barely looked up from her enormous phone, dismissing it with a wave. "That's just a phase, Alexis. Besides, pilots are just glorified bus drivers for the wealthy. You are meant for greater things, darling." The words were meant to shut it down, but they had the opposite effect. That moment planted a seed of obsession, a quiet, defiant fascination that began to grow in the shadows of their expectations. I started hiding books about aviation under my mattress, manuals, histories, engineering textbooks. They were my secret rebellion, my forbidden candy. By high school, the tension was a physical ache. I maintained the perfect GPA, aced all the AP economics and business courses they required, the ideal candidate for the next generation of SCG. But in secret, I devoured everything I could find on the aviation industry, especially the logistics and management side. I met a girl named Jane, whose father, Captain Thomas, was a commercial pilot. He noticed my intense curiosity. "You have a good mind for this industry," he told me once. "Have you considered aviation management? It combines business skills with specialized expertise." That single conversation was like sunlight after years in the dark. It offered a loophole, a possible path where my interests and the required business education could intersect. For the first time, I felt a genuine spark of hope for my future, a hope they knew nothing about. I started researching aviation business programs in earnest, meticulously building a case for a life outside their carefully constructed narrative. It was the first decision of my life that was entirely my own, and it felt terrifying, exhilarating, and completely necessary. I was charting my own flight path, even if it meant flying straight into a storm. My 4 years at Northwestern University were a masterclass in strategic double play. My parents thought they had one. They saw their daughter attending the prestigious business school they had selected, following the path they had set. They never suspected that every single class I attended, every textbook I opened, was approached with a hidden purpose, filtered through the lens of my secret ambition. College wasn't an education. It was an intelligence-gathering mission. Finance courses to them were about corporate balance sheets and leveraged buyouts in traditional industries. To me, they were about potential aviation company funding models, capital requirements for leasing a Challenger 605, and the complex depreciation schedules of multi-million-dollar assets. Marketing classes became laboratories for developing sophisticated aviation service concepts, identifying pain points in the fragmented charter market, and crafting a unique value proposition for high-net-worth clients. Every economic principle, every case study was mentally reframed. How does this apply to the fixed-base operator FBO network? What are the regulatory barriers to entry in fractional ownership? I deliberately selected electives that skirted the edges of their scrutiny, but directly supported my hidden goals. While my peers were taking easy humanities electives, I enrolled in logistics management, transportation economics, and international business regulations. My parents, when they bothered to ask, viewed these choices as sensible additions to a well-rounded consulting career. They were so blinded by their own predetermined outcome, Alexis becoming partner at SG, that they never suspected these were puzzle pieces in an entirely different picture I was assembling, a complex aerial mosaic of my own making. The true game changer arrived during my junior year in the form of Professor Max Wright. Before joining academia, he had been a highly respected executive at a major commercial airline for over 20 years. He was exactly the kind of seasoned, successful professional my parents respected, but thankfully he was outside their suffocating social orbit. After a guest lecture on supply chain dynamics, I lingered asking specific, detailed questions about aircraft utilization rates and crew scheduling efficiencies. Our conversation extended well past dinner, moving from the classroom to a small, quiet coffee shop downtown. "You understand the aviation business model better than most industry veterans I know," he remarked, studying me with a curious, perceptive gaze. "Why aren't you in our specialized aviation management track?" When I finally, hesitantly explained my entire situation, the expectations, the conflict, the shredded acceptance letters, he didn't laugh or judge. He simply nodded, a deep, understanding crease forming above his brow. "Family expectations are powerful forces, Alexis," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "But ultimately you must live with the consequences of choices made to please others." Professor Wright became my unofficial, secret mentor. He directed me toward specialized industry reports, introduced me to his network of contacts, executives, maintenance directors, and logistics specialists, and critically helped me secure an internship with a regional airline during the following summer break. I told my parents I had landed a prestigious corporate strategy position at a major transportation conglomerate. Technically true, yet significantly understated. I spent that summer deep in the guts of airline operations, learning the business from the ground up, getting my hands dirty with the reality of flight planning and passenger flow. By graduation day, I had the perfect academic facade, a summa cum laude business degree, exactly as Richard and Martha had demanded. What they didn't know was that beneath that polished veneer, I had built a small but robust network of aviation industry contacts and amassed a highly specialized body of knowledge. I was armed, certified, and ready for deployment. The partnership agreement from SCG arrived 2 weeks later in a heavy, cream-colored envelope. A substantial starting salary, a clear path to partner, the culmination of their life's work. But on the same day, I received a far more modest offer from Midwest Regional Air, an entry-level operations position, a salary barely one-third of what SCG was offering. The stage was set for the biggest confrontation of my life, and this time, I wasn't going back down. The storm hit hard and fast. It was the spring of my senior year, the time when every high schooler is supposed to feel a sense of triumphant anticipation. For me, that anticipation was poisoned by fear. My father, Richard, had borrowed my laptop. He never used his own for anything but SEG business, to check some stock figures. He didn't find the stocks he was looking for, but he did find my browser history, littered with applications to Purdue Global and Ohio State's top-tier aviation programs. The argument that followed wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. I can still picture the scene, the pristine white sofa, the oversized abstract art, and my father pacing the expensive Persian rug, his face a furious crimson. My mother, Martha, sat rigid on the sofa's edge, her disappointment radiating off her like cold granite, somehow worse than my father's rage. "We have invested everything in preparing you for a serious career, Alexis," he roared, his voice shaking the crystal on the mantelpiece. "And you want to throw it all away on some juvenile fantasy about airplanes? This is an insult to everything we've built." I tried to stand my ground, using the very business logic they had drilled into me. "It's not a fantasy, Dad. Aviation is a complex, growing, multi-billion-dollar industry. It needs management, logistics, and serious business skills. The exact skills you taught me." My mother slowly shook her head, a soft, patronizing pity in her eyes that cut me deeper than any shout. "Darling, Jennifer Smith's daughter just got accepted to Harvard Business School. Meanwhile, you want to waste your education becoming what? A glorified travel agent." That comparison was their favorite weapon. The children of their colleagues and friends. Jennifer's daughter, David's son interning at J.P. Morgan, the Henderson twins, who were National Merit Scholars, were constantly paraded as shining examples of success. I was always the failure who couldn't measure up. I felt invisible unless I was perfectly aligned with the Stone legacy. My own interests, my meticulous research, my perfect GPA, it all meant nothing if the end goal wasn't the partner track at SCG. During the few family gatherings we hosted, they would proudly list the accomplishments of everyone else's children, while my own hard-won achievements in the shadows remained unmentioned. The breaking point was when the acceptance letters arrived. I was ecstatic. Letters from those aviation programs, symbols of my secret future, sitting alongside the expected, sterile acceptance from Northwestern University's business school, their alma mater. My father, true to his controlling nature, didn't just dismiss them. He physically tore them up, right in front of me, the crisp paper shredding my dreams into worthless confetti. "This discussion is over," he declared, his voice cold and flat. "You will attend Northwestern University as planned, or you can pay for college yourself." I had no financial resources of my own. All my savings had been channeled into approved academic pursuits, and the few scholarships I won wouldn't cover the staggering tuition. I was trapped. I had to comply, at least temporarily. I accepted the offer to Northwestern, but that act of submission was actually my most significant act of defiance. Something had fundamentally changed inside me. I was no longer striving for their approval. I was plotting my escape, determined that the moment I had the means, I would follow my own flight path. College, for them, would be the start of my career. For me, it was simply my strategic planning phase. I'd go through the motions, get the credentials they demanded, and use every class, every contact, every opportunity to fuel the company I would eventually build, an enterprise they would never see coming. I decided right then that if I couldn't have their support, I would ensure they would have to witness my success, whether they liked it or not. The feeling was a toxic mix of devastation, resentment, and a newly ignited, cold determination. The child in me was crushed, but the CEO was born. I scheduled dinner with my parents at their favorite upscale establishment in downtown Chicago, the Signature Room at the 95th. I dressed meticulously in the conservative business attire they approved of: tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back neatly. I wanted to look exactly like the compliant, successful daughter they expected to see. When I arrived, they were already there, settled into their usual corner booth, a bottle of expensive champagne chilling tableside. They were radiating self-satisfied confidence, ready to celebrate my official entry into the family legacy. To the newest stone consultant, my father, Richard, toasted prematurely, raising his glass with a triumphant smile. My mother, Martha, clinked her flute against his, her eyes gleaming with the pride she had always reserved for my potential. The pressure in the room, the weight of their expectations, was nearly suffocating. I took a deep, steadying breath, reminding myself of Professor Wright's advice and the countless hours spent plotting my own course. "Before we drink," I interjected, keeping my voice level, professional, and firm, "I need to tell you both something important. I have accepted a position with Midwest Regional Air in their operations department." The room seemed to tilt slightly. The champagne glass froze, halfway to my mother's meticulously lipsticked lips. The clink of the ice, the murmur of the other patrons, everything faded into an unbearable silence. My mother's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief giving way to utter shock. Then the reaction I knew was coming. Denial, then manipulation, then cold, absolute disappointment. "You have done what?" my mother whispered, the word what loaded with such judgment it felt like a physical blow. For the next hour, I endured a calculated, tactical assault designed to dismantle my decision. My father called me ungrateful, listing every dollar they had invested in my private school, my tutors, and my Northwestern education. My mother suggested I was having some kind of breakdown, a temporary lapse in judgment caused by postgraduate stress. They reminded me of the unparalleled opportunity at SCG, the clear path to wealth and influence, juxtaposed against the meager, insignificant salary at an airline. "This is not a rejection of you or the skills you gave me," I tried to explain, my voice rising slightly, fighting to be heard over the rush of their indignation. "This is me following a career path that actually excites me. I'm applying all the business acumen you taught me, just in a different sector." My father scoffed, dismissing my carefully constructed arguments with a wave of his hand. "It is a phase, Alexis, a juvenile act of rebellion. When you are tired of working at that glorified bus station, our door will be open. Eventually, you'll come to your senses and realize where the real business is. It was a dismissal so complete, so utterly condescending, that it solidified my resolve. Their lack of respect was more painful than their anger. I realized, right there, that I would never have their approval unless I surrendered my identity. I thanked them for the dinner, quietly paid for my half of the check, a symbolic act of financial separation, and walked out, leaving them sitting alone with their expensive, untouched champagne. The following weekend, I moved out of the family guest house, loading my modest belongings into my old sedan. My mother watched me silently from the kitchen window, her silhouette framed by the expensive drapery, her lack of a farewell hug speaking volumes. I found a small, one-bedroom apartment near the airport, not in some trendy downtown loft, but close enough to the runways that I could watch the takeoffs and landings, a constant, visceral reminder of the freedom I was pursuing. The next 2 years would be the hardest of my life, a period of complete isolation from my family and their world. But the view of those planes, those symbols of my chosen future, made every sacrifice worth it. The gilded cage was finally empty, and I had taken flight alone into the unknown. The first 2 years at Midwest Regional Air were a brutal, necessary education. I wasn't just working. I was in a crash course on aviation operations, learning the business from the actual ground up. My prestigious business degree meant absolutely nothing here. I started in customer service, dealing with delays, cancellations, and angry passengers, a far cry from the velvet carpets of SCG. Every spare moment, every lunch break, every overtime hour was spent observing, asking questions, and volunteering for extra projects in other departments. Crew scheduling, maintenance requirements, regulatory compliance. I didn't just want to do my job. I wanted to master the entire ecosystem. While my former classmates, the ones who took the investment banking and consulting jobs, were posting pictures of luxury vacations in Miami and buying downtown condos, I was working every holiday and absorbing every detail about keeping hundreds of aircraft safely and efficiently in the air. I lived frugally, meticulously building a modest savings account. Every dollar saved was a tiny brick in the foundation of my future company. The contrast was stark, but the satisfaction I derived from my work, a tangible, real-world job that moved people and cargo, was infinitely more rewarding than the abstract, purely transactional work my parents championed. My dedication paid off. After 18 months, I earned a promotion to operations coordinator. It was a role that gave me comprehensive visibility into the entire system, allowing me to see the bottlenecks, the inefficiencies, and, most importantly, the opportunities in the broader transportation market. I was getting the education I truly needed, an education no business school or consultant firm could ever provide. Contact with my parents dwindled to occasional, strained phone calls around major holidays. These calls were less about connection and more about obligation. When relatives or old family friends inquired about me, and they always did because in our circle, not talking about your child's career was a social failure, my mother would vaguely mention that I was still finding myself and that she hoped I would come around eventually. My father simply changed the subject, treating my career as an embarrassing non-event. The unspoken message was clear. My existence was a failure, a stain on the Stone legacy. I remember overhearing a conversation at a cousin's wedding. My mother, cornered by a friend, sighed dramatically. "Alexis? Oh, she's working at the airport. Sorting baggage and things. We're hoping she gets her head together soon." She deliberately diminished my role as an operations coordinator, a key managerial position, to sorting baggage. It stung deeply, that willful dismissal of my hard work. That's when I realized their disapproval wasn't about what I was doing. It was about the fact that I wasn't doing what they wanted. Their validation, which I had craved for so long, was a price I was no longer willing to pay. The pivotal moment that launched the next phase of my career came during the legendary polar vortex of 14. All major flights were grounded, the terminal was pure chaos, and amidst the mess was Jackson King, the legendary tough-as-nails CEO of Future Tech Incorporated, furiously trying to reach a critical board meeting in New York. He was screaming into his phone, demanding a solution no one could provide. As the operations coordinator on duty, I spotted a bizarre loophole. One of our regional aircraft needed to be positioned to New York for pre-scheduled maintenance. I realized that with some aggressive regulatory maneuvering and a mountain of paperwork, we could get approval for a ferry flight with limited non-revenue passengers, bypassing the commercial weather closure. I navigated the bureaucratic hurdles, coordinated with the maintenance crews and the pilots, and personally escorted King onto the plane. "Most people would have just told me it was impossible," he remarked, looking completely exhausted but impressed as we waited for final clearance. I gave him a tired smile. "In aviation, Mr. King, impossible usually just means nobody has found the right regulation exception yet." He made his meeting, and 3 weeks later, he called me with an offer that changed everything. Jackson King's offer wasn't just a career step, it was a catapult. He offered me a position managing his corporate flight department at nearly double my salary. It was my golden ticket into the high-end, exclusive world of private aviation, the very world my parents had mocked. I accepted immediately. For the next 3 years, I immersed myself in the operations of a corporate flight department, learning about client expectations, aircraft acquisition, high-level crew management, and the brutal economics of private jet travel from the inside. This was a different beast than the commercial world. Here, the clients, CEOs, founders, global executives demanded seamless, personalized service. I built a formidable network. Fixed-base operators, FBOs, maintenance facilities, luxury catering companies, and key industry vendors. I observed the market closely, taking meticulous mental notes on the inefficiencies and opportunities. I noticed recurring complaints from King and his executive team about traditional charter companies, the inconsistent service quality, the opaque pricing, the rigid scheduling. Meanwhile, many aircraft owners were struggling to offset the crushing ownership costs during periods when their expensive planes sat idle. The market was ripe for disruption. My promotion and success were objective and undeniable, so I decided to make one final, measured attempt at reconciliation. I invited my parents to dinner at a neutral, upscale restaurant, not the signature room, but a place they'd still approve of. I prepared a professional portfolio showcasing my accomplishments, my executive title, my responsibilities managing a fleet of 3 multi-million-dollar aircraft, and testimonials from satisfied, influential executives like King. I hoped that seeing my success quantified, professionalized, and in their own language, the language of business, might finally earn their respect. My mother, Martha, glanced at the materials I presented with a distracted, almost bored air. She barely turned the pages. "Well, it's nice you found stable employment, dear," she said, her voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. "Though being a glorified secretary for a businessman is hardly what your expensive education prepared you for." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I am not a secretary, Mom," I countered, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "I manage a multi-million-dollar aviation operation with a team of 25 professionals, responsible for logistics and safety across North America." My father, Richard, waved his hand dismissively. The offer to join the family business still stands, Alexis. We've had an exceptional year. Our client list now includes 3 Fortune 50 companies. That is real business experience. He made my fleet management sound like running a lemonade stand. That night I left early. I walked out of that restaurant and finally, profoundly, accepted a painful truth that had taken me nearly a decade to acknowledge. Their approval would never come. It wasn't about my career path, it was about their control. If I was going to find fulfillment, it would have to be on my own terms, without their validation, because chasing their acknowledgement was a race I would always lose. The attempt at reconciliation had been a failure, but the internal clarity it provided was invaluable. The stage was officially set for the biggest gamble of my life. I was going to stop seeking their love and start building a legacy they would be forced to recognize. The idea for Apex Air Fleet, AAF, wasn't a sudden flash of genius. It was the culmination of years of quiet observation and planning. I had seen the systemic flaws in the private charter market during my time with future tech clients, like King complained about the opaque pricing, the service inconsistency, and the rigid scheduling. I realized the industry was structured for the convenience of the providers, not the clients. My solution was simple, yet radical. A service that combined the consistency of owned aircraft with the flexibility of charter, all wrapped in a layer of cutting-edge technology and human-centric customer service. For 6 months, I lived on coffee, adrenaline, and pure determination. I spent every evening and weekend refining my business plan, running financial projections, and poring over FAA regulations. I often worked until 2 or 3 in the morning, sleeping only a few hours before heading to my day job. When the plan was finally solid, I took the calculated risk and presented it to Jackson King. He was my first and most crucial test. He reviewed every assumption, every projection, asking pointed, brutal questions that tested the model's viability. The aviation business eats startups for breakfast, Alexis, he warned me, but his eyes held respect. However, this model addresses real pain points I experience regularly. What do you need to get started? With Jackson King as my first angel investor, contributing $1 million, plus my own painstakingly saved $150,000, Apex Air Fleet was born. I leased a tiny office, little more than a converted storage room, at Aurora Municipal Airport, gave my notice at Future Tech, and took the terrifying leap into entrepreneurship. The early days were an absolute nightmare, a brutal testing ground that nearly broke me. Our first aircraft lease agreement fell through 3 days before signing when the owner received a better offer from a competitor. I later learned that competitor had quietly suggested my youth and gender made me a risky business partner. Then, banking issues delayed our initial financing for 6 agonizing weeks, forcing me to defer my own salary just to keep the lights on. I slept on an uncomfortable, stained couch in the office 3 or 4 nights a week to save commuting time and remain entirely focused. My small, dedicated team of 6, mostly colleagues who had followed me from previous positions, agreed to reduce salaries in exchange for future equity, a demonstration of faith that still humbles me. Just when we finally secured our first aircraft and launched service, our inaugural corporate client canceled their contract due to a restructuring. We were suddenly left with massive aircraft payments and 0 revenue, dangling dangerously close to bankruptcy before we finished our first quarter. The financial stress was paralyzing, but I refused to let my parents' prediction of my failure come true. I knew this was the moment I had to become the CEO I was meant to be, not the one they designed. I had to pivot and fast. The breakthrough came when the CEO of a mid-sized tech company was stranded after a major commercial airline cancellation. Every other charter company was booked. We had availability. Despite our tiny operation, I personally oversaw every detail: the customized catering, the last-minute ground transportation arranged at his destination, the constant communication. He made his crucial meeting, and the following week he signed a 6-month contract. His social media post praising our white glove rescue mission went viral in executive circles. Apex Air Fleet delivered when the big names couldn't. Personal service that makes you feel like their only client. That single testimonial led to 7 new major clients within a month, giving us the lifeline we desperately needed. 8 months after launching, we added our second aircraft. The day we completed that acquisition, I took the team out to celebrate. It was a modest profit, but it was worlds away from the financial cliff we had just climbed. It was vindication, quiet and hard-won. As the business stabilized and grew, we rapidly outgrew the converted storage room office where we'd started. The chairs were so crammed that moving required a coordinated team effort. With increasing business volume and higher-profile clients, we relocated to a proper office space within the private terminal. This move was about more than functionality. It was about perception. Clients now stepped directly from their luxury vehicles into a professionally designed reception area before boarding their aircraft, an experience that reinforced our commitment to excellence. My focus shifted to creating genuine competitive advantages, not just surviving. We developed proprietary booking software that provided real-time availability and, most importantly, transparent pricing. This was our first major industry shockwave, eliminating the practice of opaque quotes and hidden fees that had defined private aviation for decades. We introduced a membership model that gave frequent clients priority access and preferred rates without the massive upfront expenditure of full aircraft ownership. But the real differentiator, the element that spoke to my core values, the ones my parents completely ignored, was the creation of our concierge department. We handled not just the flight, but everything surrounding it: hotel arrangements, restaurant reservations, special requests, and ground transportation. We focused relentlessly on reliability and personalization. While competitors advertised opulence and sheer luxury, we promised something far more valuable to our target clients: precious time saved and meticulous personal attention to detail. To accelerate our credibility, I began selectively recruiting experienced professionals from larger, established competitors, offering not just competitive compensation, but a company culture that valued innovation and personal initiative. I poached a senior scheduler from a major charter operation, a maintenance director with 20 years of experience, and a client services manager who had previously worked for a 5-star hotel chain. Each strategic hire brought expertise and instant credibility, helping us expand from a regional service to a national footprint. By the end of our second year, we were operating 5 aircraft and had established satellite offices in Dallas and Atlanta to support our growing client base. My role naturally evolved from a hands-on operator to a true CEO. I struggled with delegation, having been involved in every operational detail since inception. I hired an executive coach who helped me develop the leadership skills appropriate for a growing organization, teaching me to focus on strategy and culture while empowering my team. I began accepting speaking engagements at industry events, initially terrified of public speaking, but recognizing the importance of building the AAF brand and my personal credibility. The company I was building stood in stark, beautiful contrast to my parents' cutthroat consulting firm, SCG, where employee turnover was high and client relationships were purely transactional. My company culture emphasized both excellence and empathy. We celebrated achievements publicly, addressed shortcomings privately, and created family-friendly policies, something almost unheard of in the demanding aviation industry. Perhaps this was my quiet, profound rebellion against their values, creating a business that succeeded not despite treating people well, but because of it. This emphasis on humanity, even in the cold world of corporate aviation, felt like the true measure of my success. The years of scorn and dismissal were merely fuel, forcing me to define my own meaning of achievement. By our 5th anniversary, Apex Air Fleet had exceeded my most optimistic projections. Our fleet had expanded to 10 aircraft, ranging from light jets for regional hops to heavy jets capable of transatlantic travel. We had offices in 5 major cities, and our staff had grown to over 50 full-time employees. Our annual revenue had solidified in the 9 figures, with profit margins that surpassed industry averages. The National Air Charter Alliance presented us with their Service Excellence Award, and Air Fleet magazine featured us in a cover story titled, "The New Standard in Private Aviation." The crowning achievement was purchasing our first company-owned aircraft rather than leasing, a tangible, permanent asset representing undeniable stability. My personal financial situation had transformed. I was no longer the broke kid sleeping on an office couch. I had paid off my student loans and purchased a luxury condominium in downtown Chicago, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. I had established a modest investment portfolio and, remembering my own struggles, created a small foundation providing scholarships and mentorship for young women interested in aviation careers. The Chicago Business Review included me in their prestigious 40 Under 40 list. I was objectively successful by any measure, especially their own. Yet, the deep disconnect with my family remained painful. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that my mother, Martha, had recently described me as the family disappointment at a charity function. The Christmas card they sent to extended family mentioned my father's recent industry award and my mother's charity board appointment, followed by a vague, almost pitying reference to Alexis's unusual career choices. When our paths unexpectedly crossed at an industry conference, mine as a featured speaker, theirs as attendees, I overheard my mother telling a colleague that I worked at an airport, deliberately diminishing my role as founder and CEO. The deepest cut came when I invited my father, Richard, to our company's 5th anniversary celebration, a gala event that showcased our fleet and success. He declined without explanation. My cousin, Lauren, later confided in me that my parents had told relatives at a recent wedding that I was struggling financially and that my business was just a cute hobby, despite the clear, public evidence to the contrary. These continued dismissals, the refusal to acknowledge my reality, hurt deeply. Even as I rationally understood, they said more about my parents' rigidity and insecurity than about me or my achievements. I made periodic attempts at reconciliation, sending them our company newsletter with my CEO letter highlighted, sending congratulatory gifts when their firm won an award, and maintaining monthly phone calls. Each effort was met with the same cold pattern of dismissal or backhanded acknowledgement. When I mentioned our West Coast expansion, my father merely asked if I had considered selling the company to a real aviation business now that it had grown. The emotional impact was significant. Despite my professional fortress, I began working with a therapist to process the complex feelings of accomplishment mixed with lingering inadequacy. She helped me recognize the pattern of seeking parental approval that still subconsciously influence my decisions. Your parents may never give you the validation you deserve, Alexis, she told me during a difficult session. Can you find peace with that possibility while still acknowledging your own hard-won achievements? I knew she was right. I was slowly learning that my worth was not contingent on their recognition, but the residual pain was a constant, dull ache I was determined to heal. My therapeutic journey was crucial. It wasn't about seeking revenge, but about self-preservation. I built a strong support network, my closest friend, Sarah, and a circle of other successful female executives in male-dominated fields, who became my chosen family. They celebrated my successes without qualification and supported me through challenges without judgment. Journaling and meditation became vital practices, helping me process the lingering feelings of inadequacy that would occasionally surface, despite all the evidence pointing to my triumph. I was building an internal resilience that depended less and less on external approval, even the approval of the two people whose opinions had once defined my world. Meanwhile, in the tight-knit world of aviation and consulting, news travels faster than a private jet. It was through my informal intelligence network, a friendly FBO manager here, a catering director there, that I first learned about my parents' new, monumental client situation. Global Dynamics, a massive European technology conglomerate with $60 billion in annual revenue, had selected Stone Consulting Group, SCG, to handle their aggressive expansion into the American market. The CEO, Robert Hill, was a known entity in aviation circles for his interest in private travel. The contract was reportedly worth millions for SCG, potentially their largest engagement to date. At an industry reception, a colleague mentioned casually that Global Dynamics was seeking comprehensive travel solutions for their executive team during the American expansion, requesting proposals from several private aviation providers. 2 days later, an official request for proposal, RFP, arrived in our sales department, sent directly from Stone Consulting Group on behalf of Global Dynamics. The RFP gave no indication of any personal connection. My director of sales, an astute professional named Mark, brought the packet to my attention, his expression cautious. Given your history with SCG, Alexis, he asked tactfully, should we pass on this one? We have plenty of other prospects. It might be complicated. I considered the question carefully. The professional response, the easy way out, would be to recuse myself. The business opportunity was significant, but AAF was stable. It wasn't life or death. Yet a deeper motivation took hold. This was more than a contract. This was an opportunity to demonstrate the superiority of my values, my vision, and my company's service excellence on its own merits, in front of the two people who had bet against me for 10 years. No, I replied finally, we will not pass. We will prepare our absolute best proposal, emphasizing our transparent pricing, concierge services, and international capabilities. I want this proposal to be flawless, purely professional, and entirely irresistible. I forbade my team from mentioning my personal connection to the Stones, ensuring their work remained unbiased. 3 weeks later, the notification arrived. Apex Air Fleet had been awarded the contract. The deciding factors cited were our transparent pricing model, comprehensive service package, and strong customer testimonials. There was zero indication that anyone at Global Dynamics or SCG had made the personal connection. The first scheduled service under the new contract was a high-profile transatlantic flight, transporting Robert Hill and his executive team, accompanied by my parents, Richard and Martha as their consultants, to a critical meeting in Frankfurt, Germany. The stage was set. I decided to personally oversee the service delivery. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming my narrative. I knew, deep down, that this was the moment of truth, the final chance to force a conversation that had been deferred for a decade. The shock I was about to deliver would be the most powerful business move of my career. The stakes were higher than any contract. This flight was a decade of suppressed emotion, validated through professional success. I personally selected our newest, most luxurious aircraft, a recently acquired Bombardier Global 7500, custom-fitted with a state-of-the-art interior designed for long-haul comfort and productivity. I spent the morning in the hangar, personally inspecting the aircraft preparation, checking every detail from the thread count of the linens in the private sleeping area to the cleanliness of the lavatories. My focus was absolute, channeling all my anxiety into perfection. My client services team, following my detailed instructions, had meticulously researched Robert Hill's preferences. We knew he preferred a specific Japanese single malt whiskey, enjoyed French press coffee rather than espresso, and appreciated classical guitar music during boarding. His dietary preferences leaned heavily toward protein-rich meals with minimal carbohydrates. We customized the catering accordingly, adding special, unexpected touches. A small selection of handmade chocolates from a boutique German chocolatier as a subtle nod to their destination, a selection of international newspapers delivered fresh, and a sophisticated gift bag containing high-end travel accessories. We coordinated ground transportation at both ends, ensuring luxury vehicles and drivers briefed on the itinerary and security protocols. This was more than a flight. It was a bespoke, seamless experience. As the day of the flight approached, the nervous energy became almost unbearable. I scheduled an extra, unscheduled session with my therapist. "What is the worst-case scenario you are afraid of?" she asked me. "That they will publicly undermine me in front of Hill," I admitted. "Or that they'll act like my business is some cute hobby, not a serious enterprise." We role-played potential responses, focusing on maintaining my CEO composure regardless of their provocation. "Remember," she advised, "you have built something substantial. Nothing they say or do can take that away from you." I also shared the full story with Sarah, my closest friend. She was mercilessly supportive. "Just be the CEO you are every day, Alexis," she told me. "Their opinion stopped being relevant the day you chose your own path." Her words were a shield. The night before, I carefully selected my suit, tailored charcoal, professional authority without ostentation. I added a subtle touch of defiance, the custom-made silver airplane cufflinks that had become a personal trademark among my industry peers. I arrived at the private terminal 3 hours early, going over final preparations with the flight crew and ground team. I addressed them, omitting any mention of my personal connection. "This client represents significant expansion potential," I told them. "This is an opportunity to demonstrate why Apex Air Fleet sets the standard in private aviation. Let's show them what exceptional service truly means." As the scheduled arrival time approached, I positioned myself near the terminal entrance, outwardly calm, inwardly rehearsing my professional greeting. Through the glass doors, I watched the long, black executive Mercedes pull up to the curb. The moment of truth. My father, Richard, emerged first, impeccably dressed. My mother, Martha, followed, elegant in a tailored cream suit and pearls. Robert Hill, tall, silver-haired and commanding, stepped out last. As they approached the entrance, I could see my mother's practiced social smile firmly in place as she engaged Hill in conversation. Then, the words I needed to hear, the cruel validation of their unchanging nature, carried clearly through the quiet morning air. Hill must have asked about me. My mother's response was a dramatic sigh, her voice dripping with artificial regret. Our daughter? She's just a disappointment, honestly. Walked away from the family business to work at an airport, if you can believe it. Such wasted potential. Hill looked thoughtful. My son did something similar, he mused. Became a wildlife photographer instead of joining the company. Took me years to appreciate he was following his passion. My mother's brittle, superior laugh cut through the air. Well, I doubt taking airline reservations qualifies as a passion. They were steps away. I took a deep, final breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped forward to meet them. I extended my hand professionally, fixing my gaze directly on the CEO of Global Dynamics. Good morning, Mr. Hill. Welcome to Apex Air Fleet. I am Alexis Stone, CEO and founder. We are delighted to be handling your transportation today. The series of expressions that crossed my parents' faces was a horrifying, satisfying spectacle. First, a blank confusion at the name and the title. Then, absolute shock as they recognized my voice and my face. Finally, a paralyzing, cold disbelief. They looked like statues carved from the expensive marble floor. A flight attendant, oblivious to the family drama unfolding, approached my mother and offered her a welcome flute of champagne. My mother's hand, rigid with shock, went slack. The elegant crystal glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor of the terminal with a crash that seemed to echo in the sudden, electric silence. It was a perfect, shocking climax, the sound of a decade of denial finally breaking. Hill, the seasoned executive, quickly connected the dots, turning to my stunned parents. Stone? Wait, this is your daughter's company. My father, Richard, attempted a recovery, his voice uncharacteristically flustered, the consummate deal-maker trying to salvage a catastrophic situation. Ah, yes. Well, Alexis has been involved with this service provider for some time now. A small operation she joined after college. He tried to spin it as a junior, temporary position. Hill turned back to me, ignoring my father's diminishment completely. Founder and CEO. Impressive, Ms. Stone. How long have you been operating? We are celebrating our 6th year in business, sir, I replied, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the adrenaline coursing through me. We currently operate a fleet of 12 aircraft with offices in 6 cities across the United States. 12 aircraft. Hill raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. That is substantial. And you built this from the ground up. My mother's face had flushed a deep crimson as a staff member efficiently cleared away the broken glass. I watched my father's jaw clench. I did, I confirmed, my voice ringing with quiet authority. Would you like to see the aircraft before we depart? Our Bombardier Global 7500 is our newest edition, designed for productivity and comfort during long journeys. I would love that, Hill replied with genuine interest. He turned to my parents, whose composed facade had entirely crumbled. You must be incredibly proud. Building a successful aviation company in this competitive market is quite an achievement. My father cleared his throat, forcing out a stilted sound. Yes, of course. Alexis has always been determined. I smoothly transitioned the group toward the aircraft, positioning myself slightly ahead with Hill, discussing the nuances of international regulations, while my parents trailed behind in uncomfortable silence. As we boarded the polished jet, the AAF logo gleaming, Hill was attentive to every detail. He was clearly responding to the white glove service, the customization, and the sheer professionalism of an operation my parents had called a glamorous secretary job. Once airborne, Hill immediately engaged me in a deep business discussion. He asked insightful questions about financing, capital requirements, and my strategy for penetrating the private market. "You've been profitable since your second year," he noted, astonished. My parents sat silently across the cabin, forced to witness their disappointing daughter discussing sophisticated, high-stakes business strategy with their most important client. My mother attempted a few times to redirect the conversation back to their consulting work, but Hill's interest remained firmly focused on the aviation business and the sharp, young woman who founded it. "The service model you've created is exactly what our executive team needs," Hill commented, as the flight attendants served a specially prepared, protein-rich meal. The transparent pricing and membership benefits, he noted, were particularly appealing compared to competitors. My father finally managed to interject. Global Dynamics has always prioritized efficiency in executive travel. Our firm has recommended several aviation providers over the years. Hill nodded politely, but turned straight back to me. "Ms. Stone, how did you identify the market gap your company fills? Most established players use the same model for decades." The remainder of the flight was a public, undeniable validation of my success, a truth so sharp it cut through my parents' years of denial. As we began our descent into Frankfurt, Robert Hill made his intentions clear. "I would like to discuss expanding our contract to cover all of Global Dynamics' North American executive travel," he said, fixing me with an appreciative look, "and potentially explore options for our European operations as well. Your service model is exactly what we have been looking for." When the aircraft touched down, smoothly taxiing to the private terminal, I caught my mother staring at me. For the first time in my adult life, I saw something in her eyes that might have been genuine respect, though it was heavily mixed with confusion and perhaps regret. After Hill shook my hand and descended to his waiting car, my parents lingered, clearly wanting to speak with me privately. The terminal suddenly felt cavernous. My mother broke the silence first, her voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. "Alexis, why did you never tell us the scope of your company? We had no idea." "I tried, Mom," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Many times. I invited you to our events, sent newsletters, called to share our milestones. You made it abundantly clear you weren't interested. You called me a disappointment less than 2 hours ago to your client's face." My father, Richard, straightened his tie, visibly uncomfortable, trying to regain his composure. "Well, now that we see the scale of your operation, perhaps we can help connect you with more clients from our network." The sudden, transparent shift to self-interest, positioning themselves as supporters and beneficiaries after years of scorn, was almost comical. "I appreciate the offer, Dad," I replied evenly, "but our client acquisition strategy is quite effective as it stands. We have a waiting list for our membership program." My mother's expression shifted, attempting the familiar manipulation. "We have always supported you, Alexis, even when we didn't understand your choices. Family businesses can take different forms after all." "That is not how I remember the last 6 years," I countered, the years of accumulated hurt surfacing not in an emotional outburst, but in a calm, undeniable recitation of facts. "You told our extended family I was struggling financially. You deliberately minimized my role when speaking to others. I built this company without your support or connections. I would have welcomed your encouragement, but I did not need it to succeed." I continued, setting the terms for our future. Moving forward, I am open to a more respectful relationship, but I will not pretend the past did not happen. My father looked suddenly older. The confident demeanor that had intimidated me throughout childhood diminished. "We should discuss this further when we return to Chicago," he suggested. "I will consider it," I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting, leaving the ball entirely in their court. I walked away without seeking further resolution, heading back to my team. For the first time in our relationship, I was the one setting the terms of engagement. The shift in power was absolute, and it was a victory I had earned. The business ramifications were immediate and substantial. Within a week, Robert Hill signed an expanded contract, tripling the scope of the original agreement. The connection to SCG, ironically, even enhanced my parents' business reputation, but we maintained a strictly professional, firewall-protected relationship. The emotional impact was complex. Healing, as my therapist advised, would be a process, not an event. But the confrontation forced a genuine recalibration in my family dynamic. 3 weeks after returning, my parents invited me to dinner at their home, the first time in nearly 5 years. The evening was awkward, but it was a tentative step. My mother began mentioning my company to her friends, suddenly proud of her entrepreneurial daughter. My father, more subtly, began occasionally asking business questions that implied a new respect for my acumen. I realized that their change, though partly motivated by saving face, reflected a genuine, if limited, shift in how they viewed me. That Christmas, I spent the holiday at their house. The conversation was still strained, but when my father asked my opinion on a business matter, the simple acknowledgement of my expertise felt more significant than the content of the question itself. We found a new equilibrium, a measured respect that, while not the warm family bond one sometimes wished for, represented significant progress. The most profound lesson this journey taught me was the importance of defining success on my own terms. I had built a company that reflected my values: ethical practices, employee support, and community engagement through my scholarship foundation. The very rejection that caused me so much pain had been instrumental in forging my independence and resilience. Had they supported me, I might have built a life dependent on their approval. The difficult path forced me to develop the strengths, connections, and clarity about my own values that I would have otherwise never discovered. I learned to acknowledge their limitations, that their rigid expectations came from their own limited understanding of success and happiness, without allowing those limitations to constrain my own life. If you have ever felt underestimated or dismissed by those who should have supported you most, remember this: other people's limitations need not become your own. The path to proving your worth lies not in seeking their approval, but in building something that aligns with your own values and vision. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own passion? How did it feel when you finally succeeded on your own terms? Share your stories below. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the people who doubt you the most end up creating your greatest motivation to succeed.